The kidnappers during the school break. I used to deliver orders to homes. I did this to earn some extra money before school started again. What I'm about to tell you happened about a year ago, in an area where there weren't many customers, as most people preferred to go to stores themselves. On that day, the atmosphere was eerily calm, and I was sitting around with nothing to do. Around 10 at night, I received a notification from the delivery app letting me know someone had placed an order 8 miles away. I arrived at a house on a street surrounded by trees, almost like I was in the heart of the forest. There were no lights on the road. If I hadn't been using my car's headlights, I wouldn't have been able to see a thing. I remember delivering to this house before, but back then, there had been some light from the sunset, so the experience was completely different. The place had no cell service, and I couldn't pinpoint the house exactly on the map, but I recognized it by sight. It was right at the edge of the street I was on, but it looked completely abandoned. There were no lights or any sign of life inside. Because of the darkness, I decided to keep my headlights on. However, I had to leave the keys inside the car to do that. I told myself it wasn't the end of the world to leave the keys in the car. After 30 seconds, I left the keys and got out of the car. I walked to the door and knocked several times, but there was no answer. About 20 seconds later, my phone rang. I didn't know who was calling, and it showed as a blocked number, which meant someone had blocked it. But I had to answer because it might be related to the order I was delivering. When I answered, I heard a man's voice that seemed ordinary. He told me on the phone that he was the one who ordered the food from the store and assured me he had rushed it and would come to take the order himself. I told him I couldn't return the order because I was right in front of his house, but before I could finish my sentence, he hung up on me. At that moment, I decided to wait a minute longer at the door, and if the man didn't show up, I would head back to the restaurant. After about 30 seconds, the door finally opened. A huge man appeared, wearing a black mask that covered his face. I felt an intense wave of anxiety wash over me. I didn't know how to handle the situation, but I extended my hand to give him the order. I didn't say anything else, but he remained silent, showing no reaction. Suddenly, he screamed at me, "Now!" In an instant, I found myself facing a group of men just like him, all wearing masks. Panic surged through me at this sight, and I dropped what I was holding and sprinted toward my car as fast as I could. I slammed the door shut behind me, pressed the gas pedal with all my might, and sped away from that place. As I drove off, I heard them shouting, and one of them threw something at my car's window, shattering the back glass. Right after that, my phone rang again with the same number that had called before the man opened the door. I let it ring, not answering, as I was in a state of extreme panic and didn't know what to do. After a while, when I managed to calm down, I called the police and recounted what had happened to me. Since then, I haven't heard anything about those people. I didn't want to know anything about them, and I tried to distance myself from the incident as much as possible. Every time I thought about what had happened, fear washed over me again. I didn't know if they wanted to steal what I had or if they had worse intentions. A part of me told me they wanted to kidnap me, while another part thought they were planning something even more horrifying. And here I am now, living with the memories of that terrifying night. I can't forget that strange voice, nor their eyes peering at me from behind the masks. The question that haunts me is, what would have happened to me if I hadn't managed to escape that day? Would they have really kidnapped me, or did they have other plans? These questions follow me every day, and anxiety tightens its grip on my heart every time I remember that harrowing experience. It's a story of abduction, but it carries within it a lot of mystery and unforgettable terror. I learned an important lesson. Never underestimate what can happen in the moment you expect the least. Life is full of surprises, and some can be deadly. The McDonald's killer, I'm 27 years old and currently unemployed. It's been a while since the company I worked for went bankrupt, laying off most of the staff because they couldn't pay their salaries. At that time, a few friends of mine advised me to become an Uber driver, but I didn't want to drive people around. I preferred delivering food. I didn't think it was a bad idea and decided to do it temporarily until I found another job. What surprised me was how good the money was from delivering food. It almost matched what I was making at my previous job. But the only thing that annoyed me was that sometimes I had to go to very remote areas, sometimes even unsafe places, filled with thugs and bad people. But I was doing it for the cash. One day, I got a delivery request from McDonald's. Normally, I'd avoid orders from big-name restaurants because of the constant crowd and the often long drive. But that day, I didn't understand why I accepted the order and went to the restaurant to pick it up. After grabbing the bags, I put them in my car and started heading back. I had no idea where I was going exactly. This was my first time in that area. When I arrived, I felt like I was in a bad neighborhood. Still, there was no turning back. I parked right in front of the house. What shocked me was that the house was completely dark. There wasn't a single light on. Usually, there would at least be one room lit, indicating that someone was waiting for the order. But this house was different. There wasn't even a sound of movement. I parked in the garage and turned off the engine. As I got out of the car, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I knocked, and when I did, the door creaked open a bit. I called out loudly to see if anyone was home and told them I was there to deliver their food. Suddenly, I saw someone rushing towards me as if they had been waiting for me. As he got closer, I could make out his features in the dim light. I wasn't one to judge people by their appearance, but it was clear he looked extremely frightening. His body was covered in strange tattoos, and he had a menacing presence. His eyes were filled with rage, locked onto mine. I could sense he was planning something sinister. All I wanted to do was deliver the order and leave, so I raised my hands with the bags, but he snatched them quickly and started searching his pockets. I thought he might give me something for the order, but suddenly, he pulled out a knife and pointed it at me. I felt terror wash over me, as if my heart might stop. My thoughts raced. Either he was going to rob me, or, worse, he was going to kill me. Either way, it was a terrifying situation. In my panic, an idea struck me in that instant. I realized I had to act fast. Suddenly, I turned towards my car and shouted loudly, "Youssef, grab the gun." I shoved my hand in my pocket and hit the ignition button. My car roared to life and the horn blared. There wasn't anyone named Youssef with me, but I wanted him to feel that if he did anything to me, there was someone watching, armed and ready. I was just trying to come up with any trick to escape. In that moment, the guy shoved me hard and quickly slammed the door. I dashed toward my car, flung the door open, hopped in, and sped away as fast as I could. Of course, after that incident, I called the police, but I never heard anything about that guy since that night. I was extremely anxious that he might have vanished before they could reach him. Yet, I considered myself very lucky to have a strong car. I was convinced that if I hadn't had that car, I wouldn't be alive today. Even now, I continue to work in the same field, delivering orders to people's homes. But since that incident, I always carry a knife with me for protection. I feel like I'm in a constant state of alert. And whenever I hear a strange sound, I find myself tense and on edge. That incident has become a part of my life, and I'll remain vigilant forever. Every time I think back to those moments, I feel like I'm back on that dreadful day, questioning myself. What if something worse had happened? Would I have survived? Or would I have become another victim in those dark, remote areas? The mystery surrounds me at every turn, and I live in a constant fear that that killer might come back again. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? Would you face a danger like that? Or would you choose to run and save yourself? My life has changed forever, and I find myself living in a never-ending nightmare, a nightmare cloaked in shadows of horror and mystery. The abandoned hospital. Hazem and Saeed had agreed to visit the abandoned hospital located in their town. After gathering their things, they met at the designated time and set off together toward that terrifying place. Upon their arrival, Hazem said, "This is the abandoned psychiatric hospital I told you about." Saeed replied excitedly, "It looks like it's going to be thrilling. I wish I had brought my camera." Hazem smiled back, "No problem. We can come back again and take pictures." But he added, "For now, let's discover what's exciting here." He continued, This hospital supposedly opened in the 1940s and operated for a long time before suddenly closing without any explanation. I've heard that anyone who enters it never returns. As they wandered through the hospital's corridors, Hazem noticed a table covered in files. Saeed yelled, "Look, I found something." He peered closely at the files and then looked at Hazem. These seem to be the files of the patients who were here, don't they? What amazed them was the presence of photographs of the patients. "But these aren't old photos," Saeed exclaimed in astonishment. "These pictures are recent. They look like they were taken not long ago." The high quality of the photos made Saeed question the hospital's history. Hazem responded, "Let's leave the photos and check what's behind that door." At the end of the corridor stood a locked door. He began inspecting the wood around the door until he managed to open it. However, upon entering, they discovered that the room was completely clean, in stark contrast to the rest of the dilapidated hospital. As they continued exploring the place, they suddenly sensed the presence of another person. They heard strange sounds and Hazem said, "Be careful, there's someone else here." When they looked ahead, they saw two people standing in front of them. One of them spoke. "I didn't tell you to leave your rooms." His voice was chilling. Hazem and Saeed felt a shiver run down their spines, but Hazem tried to compose himself, saying, "We're not insane. What are you doing here? We came to explore the hospital." The other person said, "The hospital is not abandoned as you think. You're in a dangerous place." Hazem couldn't understand how the hospital could be full of people despite the stories he had heard. "Let us go. We haven't done anything." Saeed tried to convince them, but one of them responded angrily, "Don't move. We're here to help you, but we don't allow anyone to leave." Things turned ominous and dark as Hazem and Saeed realized they had fallen into a significant trap. No one knew what would happen to them now, as the two figures plotted experiments on their psyches. "Are you okay?" Saeed whispered to Hazem. But it was clear that things were spiraling out of control, and they wouldn't be leaving as they had come. At that moment, they understood that their visit to the abandoned hospital was just the beginning of the end, and they had no choice but to face the unknown lurking in the darkness of that terrifying place. As they contemplated escape, the unsettling sounds grew louder, as if they had entered another world filled with secrets and horrors. As the lights began to fade, Hazem and Saeed thought, "What will happen to us now? Will we be the new victims in this abandoned hospital?" They had no answers. All they could do was wait and watch as unspeakable terrors unfolded before them. As time passed, the strange occurrences in the hospital intensified. Odd noises and screams echoed from the dark corners. Hazem and Saeed huddled in a corner, trying to devise a plan to escape. "We need to find a way out before it's too late," Hazem whispered, while their eyes darted around the dim room. Suddenly the door swung open with a jolt, as if announcing the arrival of something unseen. Ghostly figures and mysterious voices roamed the space. With every passing second, they felt fear creeping into their bones, their hearts pounding furiously. "What's happening here?" Saeed screamed in terror. Amidst the chaos, Hazem recalled something crucial. When we were talking about experiments, could these be the people who were subjected to those experiments? They steadied themselves and decided to seek out the others who had been with them. "Let's go!" Hazem shouted. They started running toward the doors, but with every step, the spirits drew closer, amplifying their feelings of despair. As they ran, they heard a voice calling to them, "Come back! Don't go there!" But Hazem and Saeed couldn't stop. They resolved to confront their fate, no matter the consequences. Finally, they found a door leading outside, but a surprise awaited them. They opened the door to find themselves in a foggy, abandoned garden. There was nothing but trees swaying in the wind and distant screams. They felt as if the place was breathing around them. As they tried to think of the right path, they discovered that the gate was locked from the outside. "We can't be trapped here," Saeed whispered sadly. But Hazem had a plan. "We need to go back inside and look for another way to escape." Upon returning, they faced the evils that awaited them. They realized that this hospital wasn't abandoned as they thought. It was a trap for lost souls. They became embroiled in an experiment that would remain etched in their memories forever. After many attempts and feelings of hopelessness, Hazem and Saeed finally came up with a solution. But would they be able to escape the clutches of the unknown? That's what we'll discover next time when they return to this place that holds deadly secrets. It's worth noting that everything that happened was just the beginning of a terrifying adventure they would never forget. The abandoned hospital would always linger in their minds, those dark memories haunting them every time they recalled that night when they had entered the realm of madness and horror. The terrifying lamp Zena lived with her grandmother and mother in a cozy little house. Their family was small and their lives seemed ordinary. Every day, Zena would go to school and return home in the afternoon. Her grandmother had a passion for plants and gardening, filling every room in the house with greenery, turning it into a full-fledged garden. One day, her grandmother bought a strange lamp and told Zena that it helped the plants grow healthy and beautiful. Whispers about this lamp circulated at school. Some girls talked about it, claiming that whoever owned the lamp would transform, losing their humanity. But Zena and some of her friends didn't believe those tales, as many people had purchased the lamp without turning into monsters, as some had suggested. That day, Zena's grandmother regretted asking Zena to help install the lamp. However, they managed to set it up, and it worked perfectly. Later, as Zena was on her way home, she noticed an eerie light glowing from her grandmother's room, spilling out into the street. Jokingly, she thought to herself, "Are we all going to turn into monsters?" Upon entering the house, she found her mother in the kitchen, looking exhausted. Zena asked her what was wrong, and her mother replied that she had been busy since morning. She added that her grandmother wasn't home. She had gone out to buy some supplies. After a while, Zena headed to her room to greet her grandmother, who she hadn't seen since the morning, only to find the door closed. This was the first time her grandmother had locked the door. Zena knocked, and her grandmother answered in a loud voice, saying she was busy and wouldn't open the door. Zena's mind raced. Everything felt odd. She was used to her grandmother always welcoming her. Something felt wrong since the lamp had been installed. That night, she finally found the door ajar. Zena stood up and walked toward the room, but when she peered inside, it was empty. She hesitated briefly, but her curiosity urged her to enter. As she stepped inside, a strange feeling washed over her. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind her. When Zena turned around, she saw her grandmother standing under the strange lamp. Panic set in, and she quickly fled back to her room, covering herself with a blanket. Fear gripped her as she thought of everything she had heard about the lamp. The next morning, Zena decided to tell her mother what had happened, convinced the lamp really transformed people. However, her mother dismissed her claims, insisting she was imagining things due to her fear. But Zena was certain of what she had seen. Later, she resolved to wait until the house was quiet to enter the room and change the lamp. Once all the noise had faded away, she ventured into the room, carrying a regular bulb to replace the eerie one. To her shock, she discovered several more of those terrifying lamps in the room, believing there was only one. Nevertheless, she decided to replace one of the bulbs and planned to switch out the rest one by one until they were all gone. As she began to remove the lamp from its box, she heard a sound coming from outside. Thinking it was her grandmother returning early, she quickly hid under the bed in sheer terror. But the real shock came when her mother entered the room, carrying a set of those same creepy lamps. She had decided to replace all the bulbs in the house with the same kind. Zena was still in a state of disbelief, but the biggest shock was when her mother opened the closet, revealing Zena's grandmother standing inside, illuminated by the lamp's light. Her grandmother had transformed unnaturally, making Zena feel uneasy. Her grandmother's face was lined with wrinkles, and she gazed intently at the lamp. Next to her grandmother stood an empty space, and suddenly, her mother picked up the phone, saying she had arranged for a new lamp for someone. At that moment, Zena realized the rumors about this lamp were true, but it was too late. Her mother was staring at herself in the mirror, and suddenly, Xena found herself hiding her head under the bed. Events escalated, and Xena felt hysteria creeping in, but there was no escape. Fear overwhelmed her as she watched her mother slowly transform before her eyes. The room was filled with those terrifying lamps, trapping Xena between two worlds, her normal life and the realm of the strange creatures her family had become. With each new bulb installed, she felt herself drifting further away from reality. She was spiraling into madness, surrounded by an endless cacophony of sounds. Old screams echoed in her ears, "Stay away from the lamps!" But every time she tried to escape, the lights grew brighter, enclosing her in a continuous nightmare. In that moment, Xena decided she had to make a life-altering choice. She must find a way to get rid of these lamps. She would fight for her family and for herself. Remembering her grandmother's teachings about banishing evil things, she summoned her courage and emerged from beneath the bed, determined to confront the nightmare surrounding her. She moved towards the lamps, where the strange beings watched her intently. Placing her hand on one of the lamps, she closed her eyes. She began reciting the words her grandmother had taught her. She prayed for her family's liberation, wishing for life to return to normal. In that moment, she felt a strange transformation occurring around her. The doors of the room swung wide open, and the lights began to fade one by one. She saw her grandmother and mother approaching her, but this time, their faces looked normal. The fear dissipated, and the truth returned to them. When she opened her eyes, she found herself surrounded by her loved ones in a dim room. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she gazed at her family. But Xena knew that the lamp hadn't completely vanished, and it would return. She remembered her grandmother's words and vowed to protect her family, refusing to let anything threaten their peace again. With the first rays of dawn breaking, Xena returned to her real world, but the memories were fading as if they had never happened. Yet she understood that this battle wasn't over, and she must always be prepared. The tale of the beggar's corpse. I woke up after a restless sleep, chills of fear creeping through my body. My name is Yasser, and I live in a shared apartment with my friend Farouk, who is a year older than me. He has been living in this apartment for over 5 years, working as a designer and web developer. People would come to him, seeking his help to create websites, and he would exchange his services for money. As for me, I came to the city searching for a job, and I was looking for an affordable apartment to settle in while I saved up. One day, while I was on my way to book a room at a hotel, I happened to bump into Farouk. He was talking to the hotel clerk about finding someone to share the room with him to cut down costs. Immediately, an idea struck me. I needed a place to stay. After we agreed, we became close friends, which was enough reason to ask to hang out together that day. I woke up early and went to Farouk's room, knocking on the door, but he didn't answer. I waited a bit and knocked again. Finally, Farouk opened the door, looking like he had just woken up. He said, "Looks like you can't sleep as well as I can." He stepped out of the room and sat on the couch, lighting a cigarette. I opened the window to enjoy the view, and I saw the street crowded with people, almost like it was midday. The apartment was located in the heart of the city, filled with numerous individuals walking around, some of whom looked quite strange. I started a conversation with Farouk asking, "How about we go to the movies and watch a film? There's a cinema nearby showing old movies." Farouk replied sarcastically, "You mean the cinema filled with junkies?" "Yeah, but let's just keep to ourselves. No need to worry." I had a strong desire to escape the boredom I was feeling. It felt like an adventure. So, we put on casual clothes and hopped on Farouk's old motorcycle. It was fast, but sometimes it took a bit to start. Farouk sat on the bike and began trying to start it, and after several attempts, we finally hit the road. As I gazed at the sky, I suddenly caught a whiff of something foul. I looked down and found an elderly woman standing in front of me. Her facial features bizarre. Her skin had an unusual color, and her eyes were bloodshot and filled with red. That terrifying gaze made me feel a mix of fear and confusion. I struggled to speak, asking, "What do you want?" But she didn't respond. Instead, she extended her muddy hands toward me. Fear gripped me tightly. Just then, Farouk's voice broke through. "Come on, Yasser. Are you going to stand there all day?" I turned to him, but I could feel fear creeping into my heart. I decided to move away, and when I got on the bike behind Farouk, it roared to life, and we sped away from that place. Yet, I couldn't shake off the feeling of her watching us, glancing back to make sure she wasn't following. We reached the cinema, which was old but cheap. Farouk parked the bike in the garage, and we approached the ticket counter. He asked the attendant for tickets to the film that was showing. While we waited, I glanced around and suddenly felt a strange presence. There was a shadow of a figure standing in the corner. It was her. How did she get here? It took us about 15 minutes to travel from our apartment to the cinema, and it seemed impossible for her to arrive here in such a short time. I pointed to Farouk. "Farouk, look at that woman." He replied, shocked. "That's the same woman we saw outside our place." A shiver ran down my spine. How could she be here? We entered the cinema, and the place was incredibly dark. Tension built as we sat down. After about 20 minutes of watching the movie, I felt something odd. Farouk looked at me, his face pale with fear, and pointed with his finger. I turned to where he pointed, and there she was again, standing between the rows, staring at us. It was as if she was watching our every move. "We need to leave," Farouk said, clearly terrified. We hurried out of the auditorium, but the path to the garage was completely deserted. There wasn't a soul around. Farouk struggled to start the motorcycle again, but it sputtered and failed. Suddenly, I turned to see that woman standing by the cinema entrance, a twisted smile on her face. She slowly approached us, limping. There was something unsettling about the way she walked, and with every step she took toward us, I felt the blood freeze in my veins. It was horrifying to witness that scene in the dead of night. That menacing smile never left her face, and I felt as if I was on the brink of losing my mind. "Farouk, start the bike! Hurry!" I screamed. Farouk was desperately trying to kickstart the motorcycle while I watched that woman inch closer. In a moment of pure terror, Farouk suddenly fell to the ground, as if he was disintegrating, bleeding into a puddle of blood. It was a gruesome sight. Struggling, I finally managed to get on the bike, and at last, it roared to life. I sped off, both of us engulfed in fear. That night, sleep eluded us as we kept checking the street from the window every 10 minutes, terrified she might return. The ordeal continued until sunrise. With the first rays of dawn, we finally felt we could get a little rest. But the story didn't end there. Days after that incident, our landlord came to collect the rent and told us something strange. He mentioned that one of the neighbors had passed by the building and spotted the corpse of a beggar lying dead in the street, in a state of decay and crawling with insects. They discovered she had died several days prior, unnoticed by anyone. The shock was immense, and when we heard the date of her death, it was the same day we had seen her. It was as if she had died shortly after our encounter. At that moment, we realized we had lived through a terrifying experience that we might never be able to forget.